Today's session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen on the recording, you'll probably want to turn your video off. And this is one last plug for attendance. If you haven't done so already, please type your first and last name in chat so that my wingwoman Annette can take attendance. So let's get started. First, Josh is going to share the tool that he's been using and the impact that it's been having on math instruction. I'll ask questions to kind of guide the conversation. And then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion before we close out. So what exactly is Microsoft Teams? Hopefully you've figured a little bit about it out because you're on Microsoft Teams right now. But it is a video conferencing tool that allows you to share video, live chat, and files in real time. It's very similar to Zoom or Google Meet, but it's part of the Microsoft Office suite. So today we're going to talk about this tool and how you can use this tool to meet with small groups of students and teach mathematics. In addition to being able to meet live with students, which is the way that Josh was doing it, the meetings can also be recorded and played back at a later time with captions. So that's a great feature for maybe students who are absent or unable to meet synchronously at that live time, or maybe they just need a refresher on what the lesson was, so they can always go back and replay those. So let's talk about what Microsoft Teams actually looks like. Josh, will you start us off explaining like how you run the small group? What's the lesson structure?
Yeah, sure. So when we transitioned to virtual learning, I really wanted to try to give my students a sense of consistency still, which meant in the same way that we were, or at least in a similar way to how we taught them during school.
Mm-hmm.
So every day I had 4 different sign-up blocks, 2 in the mornings and 2 in the afternoons, to try to reach students at like their times. And each session was about 30 minutes, and they're structured just like you would see kind of a normal class structure, starting with going through the objective, talking through keywords, modeling a problem for the students, and then letting them work through a few on their own independently before coming back together as a group.
So I'm going to show an example because you used, how do you display the problems to the students? Talk a little bit about that. Like what's your process from start to finish?
So the first thing I would do is I read through the lessons. We use Eureka, so I look through the Eureka lesson and I read through the content development. And then I'll screenshot 1 or 2 of the questions that I think would be most useful to teach to the whole group virtually, or I guess in this case, a small group virtually. So these are just screenshotted straight from the Great Minds website, and then I put them onto a slide.
Okay, then, so that's what I'm showing right now, which is just like a screenshot of a problem from Eureka. And we're already using PowerPoint and we're already in Teams. So it looks just like this. Okay, keep going. Then what happens?
So then I would kind of think about how I would do it in class with using my document camera. And I just try to treat the team screen as a document camera. So taking them through the steps we would use with a problem, whether in a situation like this, if it's labeling points first, using the pen feature on PowerPoint to label them, they talk me through it, would be my next step.
Okay, so the pen feature, when you right click in PowerPoint presentation mode, then it asks you what your pointer options are, and you can select different colors, and then a pen appears, just like I just wrote the 3 after the whole number 10, right? And then students would talk you through. So like for this one, what might you say to students to do next?
So I might ask them to think about how they would plot both those points on the line. I would use kind of the same guiding questions they either recommend in Eureka or come up with if I think they're better. So something like, I see I have 10 and 300ths and 10 and 3/10ths. Can someone explain the difference to me? How would you use the digits to help you plot those points? Questions like that, and kind of drawing through what they talk about as they go through that part.
And so then you're annotating on the screen while the students are kind of talking through what their solution it might be.
Right, and where I would normally provide them notes for these lessons, I just have them do it on paper that they have at their house, but normally I would have them have this visual alongside with them. I just have not gotten to that part yet of small group virtual. That is a goal I'd like to have if we continue next year.
Yeah, and about how many students are in this small group with you?
Minimum 4 usually, and then we've had groups as large as 12 to 13. It really just depends on when I try to help out kind of when families can make the groups.
All right, I'm going to pause here for a moment and see if there's any questions in the chat. I see a few. So how do you ask questions? cold call. Yes, we're going to dive into all that. Why don't you speak, though, briefly, Josh, on how you ask questions to the students?
Sure. And that is a great question. So I mix it up kind of like I would do in class. I do some cold calling when I feel like that there's been students that have been a little quieter. Before each lesson, I review our expectations, and one of our main expectations is that everybody has to speak at least once. And so that means if you're a student that shared several times, you know that you have to kind of take a break from sharing. And if you have not shared at all, you know that there's more of an onus on you. I've not used the chat feature. That wasn't available to our students at the beginning. So when I was building in routines and procedures, we didn't build that in. So I avoided using chat. I think I would build that into next year. I think it's a helpful way to ask questions. But this year, when students had to ask questions, what they would do is they would unmute themselves and say their name, and that was kind of their way of raising their hand. We now have a hand raise feature, which helps with that as well. But that was not there at first, so we had to kind of brainstorm. So you just hear like kids saying their name as a way of calling
yeah.
Words.
And we'll share some additional ideas about that too towards the end. Yeah. So before we dive into the ways that the tool has actually impacted your instruction and student learning, I really want to start with the feedback that parents and students have been sharing with you, because this really sets the stage for like why you might even consider using this tool right in the fall. So Josh, I'll let you read the feedback on the screen, and then if you could give a little background and context as it pertains to the text that you got from the parent.
So that first one says, "Thank you. You and the positive peer pressure socialization is so important. Now that blank can be muted and has no one to fool around with, his mouth's volcano issue is probably less of a problem." That is in reference to a student who during the school year definitely had a bit of an issue with blurting during class time. But I do think that having to say his name just to share was like a helpful reminder of him of when to share. But I think that part about peer pressure and socialization was also a big part, and why I was pressing the small group so much. Students have so much more isolation during this social distancing and quarantine time that I think that even if they weren't excelling at the math content every day, I think that time being with their peers and having some sense of like normalcy was really helpful for them.
Yeah. And you have that mute feature too. When I was watching the lesson, there were a few times when you had to just mute somebody because they were still chatting. Not in a rude way, but like they were blurting out or they weren't aware of the fact that like someone else is talking and stuff, and so you just politely muted them.
I wish I could take into the classroom.
I know, right? If only that would transfer. All right, keep going.
Yeah, and then so that kind of goes with that next one. Starting the day with the same class, same teacher, same kid does wonders for a 10-year-old sense of structure. And I heard that from a lot of parents, whether it was like the 9 o'clock, the 9:30, or a 2 or 2:30. Knowing that was on the student's schedule was really a helpful way for them to structure their day. And I saw that too. Like students were there ready to learn. They knew the systems pretty early on, I'd say by the end of our first week of learning. And when we did things like partner talk, which we'll get into a little bit later, or working independently and coming back together, they were really ready for the systems. And I think it's having that structure that helped. And then the last one is I've been eavesdropping a little bit during his math calls, and I've noticed him being more engaged and excited to learn. That was in reference to a student who during the school year really had a tough time following along with lessons. He wasn't really focused often, but he picked it up in such a big way virtually. And I think it was maybe some safety and security of the smaller groups. And just knowing that everyone was kind of in the same position, I think helped make him feel more comfortable. So that was a nice thing to see also.
Yeah. Let's check back in the chat. Annette, anything popping up that might be relevant and useful for right now?
Someone does have a quick question about how you copy and paste the page from Eureka. For example, do you copy and paste it to the PowerPoint? How do you get the problem into the display?
I use the screenshot feature. I use my MacBook, so it's pretty easy to screenshot on there. I think it's pretty easy on the Dells as well. But yeah, I just screen grab it and then paste it on that way. I found when you copy and paste things with Eureka, fractions and number lines and all of that, it comes out kind of cluttered and clunky. So I just screen grab it instead.
Yeah, let me see if I can.
It's called the snipping tool if you have a PC.
Yeah, I was going to see if I could pull that up
it's
real
a
quick.
Little scissors icon you can drag down to your taskbar.
So I'm going to stop sharing my just for 1 minute so I can show that. So
Windows is catching up, I guess.
I know. I'm a Mac girl too, so this was kind of okay. Can you guys see my entire screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So the snipping tool is right here. Well, it's on my toolbar, but you can just search for it in Microsoft, and you just click the new button, which is like a little scissor, and a little cross shows up, and you can just drag it across the part of the screen that you want to snip. And then that becomes a picture. You can just copy and paste that picture right into your PowerPoint.
Very cool. Well, now I might actually start using my Dell again.
You can actually change the Eureka Math as a Word document, and you can edit it that way too.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll have to try that out. Plenty of time to practice.
I do that for my IEP students who use technology. I email them the lesson, and then they're able to type on their answers and send it back to me.
That's really smart. That's a great idea.
Thank you. All right, so let's now talk about how the tool has really impacted student learning and some of the strategies that you developed along the way that have been helpful. So let's start with one of the things I noticed when I was watching your lesson is that your students really had an opportunity to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, which is one of our mathematical practices. So why don't you talk about those two strategies that you've been using with students during the Microsoft Teams small group lesson?
Sure. So the first one is more of just kind of like a lower level connection, the same things we would probably do in the classroom, give a snap clap, or, in school, use the connection sign at our school if we agree. So that gives students a chance to kind of give that positive feedback to students' answers that they agree with. The second one's more of a higher level one, seeing and hearing what other students are thinking. I think it also helps with some accountability in that after someone shares reasoning, that's a good time where I like to cold call somebody and ask them to either restate or summarize what the person was saying. Gives that student who spoke some affirmation. I think it helps other students, by paraphrasing it, gain a better explanation. And that does take, patience and building into the time, but telling students if they weren't able to hear it the first time, the original student might restate it again, and then they're ready to share it. But I really do push students and encourage them to be able to restate and summarize each other's thinking, even when we're working virtually.
Yeah, and I think because we're all remote and without this tool, they wouldn't be able to see each other, right? They wouldn't be able to hear each other, just be themselves in the packet.
Yeah.
So that's really basic, but at the same time, it's really powerful that we can, in some ways, recreate what students were experiencing in the classroom. The next one is receiving immediate feedback on their learning. Can you share a little bit about how you are providing that feedback to students?
Yep. So about halfway through the lesson, that's the time when they can start diving into some independent work. When they do that, their expectation is that the camera is on and their mic is muted. That way I can see each student as they're working, and even if I can't see the normal work I would see while circling around the room, I can still give feedback on how they're looking focused, if they're taking good notes. And
yeah, they're not getting a snack from the kitchen during the independent work time.
It keeps them kind of on task during those 2-3 minute periods. And then we do shout outs both from me, but I also encourage all the students to give shout outs each lesson to their peers. And that's something that we do at the end of the lesson. And I found that to be some very powerful feedback that they've given to each other. Things like, I've noticed that today you were stuck on that question, but then you persevered through it. And that stuff is great to hear from the students noticing those things.
All right, and then the last one is that students really obviously have a chance to explain their thinking and reasoning. I know you give those practice problems in real time, and instead of just working through the problem on their own, they actually do that with you guys in small groups. Can you talk a little bit about the popsicle sticks and how the students take turns explaining, and then the team's partner chat?
Yep. So I do want to give kind of with that accountability piece, I do want all students to be able to share. And I do want them, when it comes to those practice problems, it would probably be the same 2 or 3 people if I asked for volunteers each time. So I either do popsicle sticks or I do different random sites online, whether it's like a wheel or a pick a name out of a hat thing. And students are told that, you can't pass, you have to answer something, but it's okay if you don't know the answer. So if going back to that number line problem, if the student only knew that 10 3/10 belonged on the number line, we would have them start talking through their thinking and then people could chime in and help out with the answers, but everyone's responsible to at least share something after that practice time. And then
the partner chat.
Yeah. So partner talk is something I started building in the last month or so of virtual learning when I thought my students were ready for it, with the idea that just like at school, we should be able to work together, and thinking about how we could facilitate chances for students to talk in smaller groups so they'd still have that impact of hearing each other, critiquing each other, and so on. So the first thing we did was, as you can see, there's some posters below too. We built in some stems and some expectations from partners first. So as a group, we talked about what did partner talk look like in the classroom? What was successful about partner talk when we were working together? What were some things that didn't work? After that, we create our expectations and our stems. My next step was that me and our math specialist, we did a partner chat, just the two of us, kind of as a fishbowl, so that students could hear what it sounds like. And then we probably spent 2 or 3 days with just one group sharing each day and giving them that same critiques, feedbacks. This was what went well. This is what could have gone better. So this probably took 6-7 days to build in before we had students doing partner talk in like a very fluid way. But once
that was face to face, right? Like before all of this COVID happened.
Oh no,
right?
this is all separate virtual.
Oh, that was separate. Okay. So it happened virtually but separately.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So we built that all in, and then now every day when we had partner talk, we had these stems up both in English and Spanish for our Spanish speaking students. And students usually worked with the same partner just because I feel like that was a way to make it easier for them while virtually. And they got into a pretty good flow of how to share and how to pause and how to listen to each other. A lot of talking about how in person, it's kind of easy to see when you're finished speaking because you can give someone an IQ or just like a nudge. But when we were finished speaking, we had to say things like, I'm finished speaking. My turn's over, just so students had that. Okay, now it's my turn. Mm-hmm.
So it kind of is like the conversation you and I are having now, except the rest of the class is listening in on that conversation. And I actually did get to observe Josh's lesson, and the kids really do use the stems. One of the students even said in the lesson I observed, he said, okay, I'm done now. It's your turn. You do the next one. And it was great to hear them sharing and learning how to have a conversation, really.
Right. And that's been the really exciting part for me. And if we do have to go back virtually next year, I think that we'll be in a good space to get started with that.
Yeah, it seems so basic, but it actually is a skill that students need to have when speaking and listening. It's a listening and speaking skill.
And I would just recommend giving yourself a few days to establish it and being really patient with it. The first couple of times, you might have to have them go back and try a few times.
Mm-hmm.
They know that they're doing it the right way and taking those pauses and using those cues.
And you said that you guys practice separately. So was that was outside of the context of math class? Is that correct? Or
no? So so for maybe a week or so, I set the last like 5 to 7 minutes apart for different partnerships to have one turn, and kind of the fishbowl watched us in the fishbowl, we would watch them and give them feedback and compliments and build it in before we'd start letting 2-3 groups go in the same day, because I think they would have lost focus if we had too many groups try it all in the same day. It's just a lot of listening, and I don't want to put them through that. All
right. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Checking back in with you, Annette, in the chat box. I see one question I'm going to go ahead and answer. It's about outside of screen sharing. Do you know if there's any interactive applications where students can show their work and thinking on the PowerPoint in real time? Yes, next week we are going to talk about Explain Everything, and that is an opportunity for students to work collaboratively on a whiteboard. And I also know there's another tool called Whiteboard. I think it's called Wi-Fi. I'll find the link and share it. But it is basically every student is issued a virtual whiteboard, and the teacher can see what everybody's writing on their individual whiteboards at the same time. It was made by a European teacher. I think he's either from Sweden or Finland. And it proved to be very useful as the entire world went through a pandemic. But
that's really cool.
Tools like that are most helpful, I think, when students can, they have a stylus or they can write with their finger, because it is kind of complicated to write on the screen with a mouse.
Yes, it is.
And we have the name of that whiteboard app, whiteboard.fi. That's in the chat.
Thank you. I knew there was an FI in there. Whiteboard.fi. Thank you.
And
yes,
of course,
it works
everyone,
on all devices because it's a website. It's not an app.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that.
For partner chats, are students assigned to various channels within Teams?
So we don't do it in smaller breakout groups. So that's where it gets a little tricky because they're all in the same space where normally they'd have more time to collaborate. So what I do is I assign each group a problem ahead of time. So say that me and Tanaga were doing problem D and then 2 other people were doing problem B. We would give each group a chance to answer it separately, and then they'd come together to talk. So after the group that did B talked, Tanaga and I would talk about D. I like how Zoom has breakout rooms, but I don't know if there's a way to seamlessly bring them in and out of that on Teams.
All right, here are just some general recommendations that Josh and I came up with after, his using it for a few weeks with his students, things that he maybe will keep in mind for next year and tips that might help you get started. I'll give you a minute to read through those on the screen on your own, and then we'll add on if there's any additional questions or comments. So the first one being selected with practice problems. Josh, can you speak a little bit about what's worked best with you? How many problems do you typically give students?
It depends on the complexity of the standard. Usually when they're doing it on their own, no more than 4 unless it's one of those quick drill kind of days in Eureka.
Okay.
And also, I've taken the complexity of the problems down in general when they're working. I think it's more important for them to feel the success of working through a couple problems and getting them right, more so than really pushing the thinking virtually. I'll put some harder problems on as a challenge, and students can answer those in their private Teams channel or meet with me offline to do those. But in small group, I've brought down the difficulty a little bit when you think about like those edulastic problems, more of the level, the depth of knowledge 1, 2, and 3, not so 4.
You kind of dived into the third a little bit, so I want to just go ahead and jump to that one. You talked about students that maybe are having difficulty. What's your plan? What do you do when students are having difficulty right there in the lesson?
So if having difficulty in the lesson, we can either plan, if it's something that from talking to them I can see as a quick fix, I'll have a student kind of talk them through it. If it seems that there's like a more conceptual misunderstanding, I'll make a plan to meet with them later in the day for 10 to 15 minutes and share through the problems. Another part of the difficulty kind of goes back to the speaking expectations. I had a lot of camera shy and audio shy people at the beginning. And so for the more extreme ones, what I did was worked with them and their families. I'd send them a couple prompts the night before so they can know the question I was going to ask them and know what problem it was going to relate to, so they would feel more comfortable sharing with the group. And there just might be times when accommodations like that you need to make for certain students.
Yeah, that kind of leads into the second bullet about the video and chat feature. We noticed between the two of us that your organization allows the teacher account to have a little bit more control over what the students have access to. So with Josh's account as a teacher, he's allowed to mute people or disable the chat box or disable video at times. And so there may be times during the lesson when it's more beneficial to have those features disabled so that you can focus in on maybe what's on the slide or what the teacher is saying.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think I would open up chat next year for questions, but even then I would really have to be strict on the expectations and practice it before letting them have a full reign at it.
Earlier, someone asked about engaging students, and we talked about popsicle sticks, but we also found a website called Wheel of Names. Now, unfortunately, it does have ads on the side, but you can just type in your students' names and then spin the wheel. And it will call on a student and everybody can see who's being called on. And then that's a great randomizer as well in terms of being able to make sure everyone's engaged. And from there, you can remove the student's name so that they're not called on again.
That's fun. Yeah.
So that's called Wheel of Names. It's free. You just have to Google it.
Yeah, that's always helpful too. I think just knowing that they're always potentially accountable, I think helps everyone focus a little bit better too.
Yeah. Let's see, what else? Meeting consistently. We heard that from one of the parents, right? They said that it was really nice to be able to meet at the same time. And then the other example is here on the Microsoft Teams website, they actually have some examples of setting clear instructions for your students when working on Microsoft Teams. So I'll share this link in the chat box. And let's see. Sorry, I have two screens going here. I can't see here. So they have a distance learning center that shares additional steps for and like guidelines for running a class meeting and sharing that with students. So I'll share this link in the chat, and you can use that as an additional resource as well.
And I can just add on, since I use the PowerPoint in a different window, so I'm constantly clicking in and out of the PowerPoint to look at people's faces and check in names, muting, unmuting. I think it's just getting comfortable with moving in and out of the content so that you can also do the classroom management from afar.
Yeah. All right, so at this point, we're going to move into the discussion. If you have questions and you put them in chat, Annette will read them out. I don't know, we might be brave and try and use the audio feature. There's quite a few of us on here, so if you are not the one speaking and you choose to, you want to ask your question via audio, I ask that you unmute yourself and try and take turns. Be kind. And if you feel more comfortable just typing your question in chat, then Annette, you can start reading some of those off now as well.
Sounds great. Several people want to know if you can share the slides afterwards, and I said yes, of course.
Yes, and it will also be recorded and posted on the website as we get closer to the beginning of school year, because people might want a refresher, or maybe you just want to share with a colleague like, hey, we might want to consider using this. So you'll be able to look back.
So one question that came in is, how do you engage the kids that fall behind? For example, if a kid has not logged in for 2 weeks.
That's a great question. And that was more of a struggle at the beginning as everyone was getting comfortable with Teams. The best answer I have is I'm kind of a crazy person when it comes to like tracking down parents and students. Start with emails when that doesn't work. Personal messages on our like parenting messaging system, and then I eventually just started using my Google Voice number and calling parents, texting them. And of our, I think I have 49 total students in my group, I was able to get 48 out of 49, at least in 2 small groups a week. So that was pretty successful. But without, I think you just have to just be more persistent with hunting them down. And then I see that you had a follow up on how I get them caught up when they're several lessons behind. That's when, so the good thing about scheduling these small groups is I do an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, and then I have 4 hours in between. That was a lot of time for kind of open office hours, meeting up with students who needed that extra time and support. The great thing about one-on-one teaching is I feel like you can get like 3 days worth of content done in the same amount of time at a whole group. So it can be exhausting at times, but just using that time to meet with students kind of one-on-one who are falling behind and run through some lessons with them.
And don't forget, you also have that recording feature. So you can also record the small group lesson that they did miss. And if it's just, 1 or 2 lessons and they need to make up, they can always play it back, pause, work through the problems, hit play again, and so forth. So
yeah, that helps too. I think some of them really like learning from the recordings.
There's a question about not having to switch screens. Are there any particular apps or extensions that work within PowerPoint and live on the screen? Like if you want to use the timer and the wheel of names.
That's a great question. So I keep the screen on PowerPoint and I use my phone for the wheel, and I just hold my phone up to the screen like this. So because I'm not sure if it always works like this, but I think the facilitator's screen is always, the face is always visible, even if you have the main screen on something else. So they just know they have to look in the small corner to see it.
And there is a way for you to choose the settings in your Teams to display whatever is on your screen. You can choose to display only one application like PowerPoint, or you can choose to display whatever is on your screen. So you could drag and layer different windows and applications onto one screen and have it show to everyone.
And I think Control Tab lets you seamlessly switch from like Google Chrome to PowerPoint and so forth. The reason I'm not able to do that is because I have two screens going on right now. So, but yes, that's definitely an option.
Fancy.
Other questions? Someone's saying for homework, Anna's saying for homework, how did the students send the answer?
So I used the assignments tab on Teams for homework, and the students knew that so each day I just set up, like, say we were doing module 5 lesson 30, I just titled the assignment module 5 lesson 30, a little spot for them to enter their work, and they could send their work, they could type out the answers, they could take a picture with a family, like their parents' phone, and just submit the picture, or they could email it to me separately. The assignments tab I found, though, to be very helpful, because they can just, it gets collected, it shows who's turned it in and who hasn't, and who's reviewed it too, which is a helpful feature, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I would just add, this year was weird with homework. I wasn't too hard on kids for missing homework. I know there was a lot of contingencies with that, both from DCPS instruction and from us. So it was kind of like, if you have it, the homework, great. If not, I'll like follow up with you to make sure it's happening, but I'm not gonna impact you if you didn't do it, because we knew there was so much going on.
There are some general discussion questions about like your remote teaching experiences, if anybody wants to dive into one or two of those. I really am hoping that this is just a space for teachers to kind of share and exchange ideas. So if you have some other ideas that worked for you, or you are already doing this and you have something to add on, please feel free to share those things right now as well. Josh, is there anything that you would change going forward next year?
There's a few things I would change. I think giving the students some sort of note-taking organizer at home, whether it's something printable or something that they could like easily create some sort of interactive notebook. I hate writing on scratch paper. It's too disorganized for me for math. So I imagine if it's a 9 or 10-year-old doing it, it probably looks much more disorganized. So thinking of some sort of organizational product to give them where they could record the lessons each day using pen and paper. That is probably my number one thing I would focus on when we got back next year.
We've got a great question coming in about how do you collaborate with special education resource teachers? For example, do you try to live co-teach in real time or work offline to provide recommendations on what they can do in small groups with students on their caseload?
That's a great question. We did not do virtual co-teaching this year. That would be another thing I'd like to improve upon next year. What I would do is I would share my calendar each week with the special ed group. So what lessons we were doing each day, the problems I was doing each day with them, and then they would adapt it for their students. So when they join small group, they might actually have that organizer already for them, whatever they were using already in school.
And there's one last question about, you used the Engage New York workbook, correct? Is that where you got the problems from?
Great Minds. I went to Great Minds and then went through the 4th grade curriculum on there. So I guess that is, the Engage New York book.
Yeah, and that's where the Word and PDF version of the lessons are. All right, well, we're going to wrap up now. As always, technical assistance is available as it relates to today's session with Microsoft Teams. Feel free to reach out. We could work together on selecting a lesson that might be a good pick for small groups instruction, or just kind of thinking through some more of the logistics of like how to set this up in your classroom. For more tools as it relates to distance learning, feel free to check out the distance learning website on OSSI. I'll let Annette throw that link into the chat box. There's a bunch of resources on there with regards to teaching math remotely and teaching math during these uncertain times. So feel free to check that out. Thank you so much for joining us today. Josh and I will hang around to continue to answer questions in the chat for the next 5 minutes, but we appreciate your attendance, and there are 3 more sessions on Fridays in June if you'd like to attend. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. I'm also always available for questioning later, too, if you have specific 4th, 5th math-related questions. Happy to help.
And
Yeah.
Josh, you want to put your, Tanaga and Josh, you want to put your email addresses in the chat box for everyone?
I'll do that now.
Thank you, Tanaga. Thank you, Josh. That was really awesome.
Oh,
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Spread the word. And if you have a tool you want to share, let me know.
Will do. You're using some of my coaches in the other 3.
Oh, who?
You should be using my friend